like the way you move.
The American government is a fungus that keeps on growing.
Here is the government explaining how they want to blow stuff up, hijack jets, kill people, and blame it on foreign enemies.
What we're dealing with is a homicide investigation, an open homicide investigation into 3,000 deaths.
What we have there is a mystery that hasn't been solved.
I think there are thousands of people who know who is responsible for 9/11, and it's not Osama bin Laden.
America, a land of opportunity and freedom of speech. But it's also a land run by a government that operates in virtual secrecy. Put the two together and you're left with a hotbed of conspiracy theories. The killing of Kennedy, Pearl Harbor, the Oklahoma bombings. Just some of the events that have sparked suspicions that things might not be quite what they seem. But the mother of all conspiracy theories is 9/11. Now, America's a big country with a big population, but all it takes is a few rumors on a few websites, and the whole world is talking conspiracy. September 11th, 2001. The world watched in disbelief as American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. America was rocked to the core. Just 17 minutes later, a second plane hit the South Tower, dispelling any myths that the first one was an accident. Over in Washington, one of the country's most heavily defended buildings was under attack. A passenger jet flew directly into the Pentagon. The fourth and last attack was foiled. It's thought that passengers bravely fought back against the hijackers and stopped it from hitting another high-profile target. The plane crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. In just under 90 minutes, these devastating events had taken almost 3,000 lives.
I've lost my wife and daughter who've been in the building.
It was the biggest attack ever on American soil. The 19 hijackers, many of them from Saudi Arabia, were also killed. The headlines shrieked about the appalling act of Arab terrorism. But not everybody was convinced. Within days of the attacks, a dedicated band of obsessives, skeptical of the documented events, set out to show a very different story.
Nobody was really let loose on that crime scene and said, find out what really happened here.
What the news reports were saying about what happened on 9/11 just didn't match the facts as I understood them.
The uncertainties brought questions, and more questions. Then come the alternative theories, many pointing the finger of blame at the heart of the US government. The skepticism has spread steadily into the mainstream of American life. Michael Moore's controversial documentary, Fahrenheit 9/11, hasn't followed the more extreme conspiracy theories, but it has directed an uneasy public mind onto the White House.
With everything going wrong, he did what any of us would do. He went on vacation.
We must stop the terror. I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you. Now watch this drive.
For the first time in my life, I don't trust the government of the United States. It only deepened my perceptions of the stupidity of the current administration.
I think we've been pretty much brainwashed in the last few years.
I can't believe people don't question things more and like really wonder what the truth is. I mean, it's amazing how stupid people are. I mean, it really is.
Michael Moore.
Hey, Michael, how are you doing? I'm good. John Tanner.
The film has helped prompt the American public to question the motives of their current government. A lot of people are uneasy about what they've been told. A few are downright disbelieving.
Michael Moore. How are you doing? Good, good.
The skeptics are asking some very pertinent questions about the tragedy of New York. But the doubts start 200 miles away, at the Pentagon, the hub of America's defenses. It was into this building on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. that American Airlines Flight 77 is said to have crashed. The question is, how did the plane get there undetected? Air traffic controllers knew about the New York attacks, but there was confusion and chaos, and they failed to locate the plane headed for the Pentagon. The military fared no better. They sent jet fighters to intercept it, but were guided in the wrong direction.
They've spent billions of dollars doing drills and exercises over decades to defend that very building. And the idea that one or two air traffic controllers got confused and therefore the whole system collapsed is just a complete lie.
The government's version is that this plane, which was allowed to fly unmolested for 40 minutes in the most defended airspace in the country, was able to execute a 70-degree turn and descend 5,000 feet in 2 miles, then level off and run flat just above the ground and crash into this Pentagon at a certain angle without ever touching the lawn. And it's just, the story doesn't wash.
A controller at nearby Dulles Airport is said to have described the plane's behavior like that of a military plane, not a commercial one. The nature of the damage to the Pentagon walls has also aroused suspicions.
When you look at photographs of the holes punched into the Pentagon, they are much too small to accommodate that gigantic jetliner. It just doesn't work. Now, you can speculate that large pieces of the plane were torn off on impact and scattered everywhere, but they are not to be found in photographs. You don't see wings lying around on the lawn of the Pentagon, for example. It doesn't add up.
When the story told by the government, the FBI, and the politicians doesn't seem to tally, people start to look at the wild and the wacky. And there's plenty of that about. Don Paul has spent the last 3 years researching an alternative account of the crash. He claims there can only be one rational explanation.
You asked, what do I think did hit the Pentagon? I think it was a combination of internal explosives and a hard-nosed missile. Certainly the nose cone of a commercial airliner, which is basically immediately collapsible, could not have made that penetration.
But if American Airlines Flight 77 didn't hit the Pentagon after all, then what happened to the plane and the passengers on board?
I do believe that the airliner was disposed of in the least conspicuous manner possible. For a long time, I thought it was probably dumped directly in the Atlantic Ocean, and that still seems to me the likeliest thing.
What's emerging is the tip of a conspiracy iceberg, so evil that it defies belief. And if the official story of the Pentagon incident is open to question, then what about the other events of 9/11? Like what happened to Flight 93, the fourth plane to be hijacked. The official version is that heroic passengers diverted the plane from its target by crashing it into a field in Pennsylvania. But that doesn't wash with everybody. Alex Jones, a local radio and television presenter based in Texas, is a firm believer that the government is hiding the real story.
It was in the local Pennsylvania newspapers that the witnesses, including police and firemen, people that know what they're looking for, saw F-16s chasing Flight 93, and that they saw 2 missiles fired, and that they saw explosions at a high altitude. And then the material evidence supports that. They found an engine 8 miles away from the larger debris field. And they found other parts of the plane 4 miles from the main debris field. There's never been a case where a plane loses control or is brought down deliberately and has a debris field 8 miles long. They've had planes crash into mountainsides, in Tibet, and you don't have an 8-mile long debris field. It just doesn't happen. It only happens when aircraft are hit by missiles.
Government secrecy and a mountain of unanswered questions has so far led us to the theory that Flight 93 was shot down by the US Air Force and that a missile hit the Pentagon while Flight 77 crashed into the sea. So that leaves New York. But millions of people watched as the second hijacked plane crashed into the Twin Towers live on TV. So surely there can't be any doubt as to what happened there. Wrong.
Well, wrong for those who believe there's been a gigantic cover-up. They question how 2 planes managed to hit the Twin Towers in the first place. Skeptics say it would have been impossible for Arab hijackers given only rudimentary training on very small aircraft to perform such a feat. Steering a jetliner would be an entirely different proposition.
Are we to conclude that a few Saudis who were trained badly at small airports in the United States to fly very small planes were able to execute these dazzling maneuvers right on schedule? I don't think so. I don't think that was the case at all.
Fighter pilots and others and commercial airline pilots have looked at the maneuvers that these jets pulled, and they said that we couldn't even do that. I mean, they have to have special transponders and flight paths just for an experienced pilot to be able to land properly at a major airport, much less perfectly T-boning 2 buildings. I've interviewed many fighter pilots and commercial air pilots, and they said they couldn't do that maneuver. Only fly-by-wire can do something that sophisticated. We've all seen the video of cruise missiles going down chimneys, cruise missiles going through windows. Only something by remote control can fly with that much precision.
In this case, it could be used to actually direct a hijacked plane into a building without the need for any hijackers to be on board.
For some, it's not about who or what hit the Twin Towers. The dramatic collapse of the buildings an hour after the collisions fuels speculation that the planes alone could not have brought the buildings down.
Yes, they could have twisted the structures at the top. Yes, there could have been a certain amount of melting of the steel structures. We saw that most of the fuel was exploded out in the air. You had to have another element, and that other element would be explosions preset inside the towers at key points to bring the whole thing down.
What makes me suspicious about the collapse? It was almost a free fall. There was no resistance all the way down. They fell in one continuous piece. Whereas had the planes caused some structural failure in a certain spot, there would have been varying resistances on the way down.
It was like straight down. That simply does not happen. That's not the way it is. You're looking at a demolition, and that is carried out by other means.
Many of these theories about 9/11 are encouraged by amateur video pictures of George Bush visiting a school in Florida on the morning of the attacks. Theorists believe that this provides proof that the President of the United States knew about the attacks before they happened. An advisor is seen telling the President about the second collision. What makes some suspicious is how the President reacts to the news of the biggest terrorist atrocity in American history.
They know now that 2 planes have hit the North and South Tower in downtown Manhattan, and he still sits there for another 7 minutes reading the little goat story.
Get ready.
Oh, girl had a pet goat.
Go on.
She likes to go running with her pet goat.
Go on.
She plays with her tail.
Try it again. Get ready from the beginning of that.
To me, he almost looks robotic, certainly unmoved. Other people say he went into shock. I don't think so. He didn't look like that to me. He didn't look terribly upset. You can explain it one of 2 ways. Either he had foreknowledge that this was going to happen, or his mind was in such a state of, you might say, collapse, that he just simply didn't react.
The administration's explanation is that he didn't want to panic America and that he wanted to remain calm. There are ways to get out of that and to act presidential rather than reading a book about goats to children while the worst disaster in American history is occurring.
So, the serial skeptic who just won't buy the official line finds the deeper you dig, the more murky water you fling up, leading to ever more extreme theories, like bin Laden having nothing to do with any of it. But then you come across some intriguing facts which make you stop and think, like the fact that the Twin Towers were only insured against terrorist attack a few short months before, leading to a multi-billion-dollar payout. And if that's not suspicious enough for you, wait and see what we got for you in part 2. 9/11 is at the centre of America's greatest conspiracy theories since the assassination of JFK. Now, if you've got a country of 280 million people, all of whom enjoy freedom of speech, then that's a lot of questioning minds. But a secretive government obviously means that some people won't get the answers they're looking for, and conspiracy theories will spring up all over the shop. But suspicion, finger-pointing and accusations are nothing new.
For instance, there have been previous accusations of the US military targeting American civilian planes, like this TWA plane which crashed into the sea near Long Island in July 1996. All 230 people on board were killed. American military exercises were being carried out nearby. This aroused suspicions about what could have happened. Back in Texas, radio host Alex Jones has been looking into the tragedy. He claims the government is hiding the truth.
TWA Flight 800 was clearly shot down. There were military maneuvers going on that night off the coast of New York, and over 200 military officers have been on the record as saying they saw 2 distinct missile trails go up and hit the aircraft.
After 4 years of investigations, aviation officials declared that the explosion was caused by a short-circuit fuse which blew up the fuel tank.
When the wreckage was reconstructed, the few photos that they released show that it had giant holes blown in it. It was not the fuel tank.
John Whalen has spent the last 10 years writing about America's biggest conspiracies. He believes that what happened that night is open to question, but that it's not necessarily a sinister conspiracy.
I think that's one of the problems with a lot of conspiracy theories, is when the government does a horrible job of investigating and doesn't pursue all avenues, the theories will linger. And I think what we have there is a mystery that hasn't been solved.
Other similarities are drawn between 9/11 and another terrorist outrage, the Oklahoma bombing. This time the issue is the possibility of pre-planted explosives. On the 19th of April 1995, right-wing extremists blew up the Murrah Federal Building using a car bomb. The blast killed 168 people. Former soldier Timothy McVeigh was convicted and executed for the crime, but some say the car bomb alone couldn't have caused such extreme damage.
There's no way that the supposed explanation as to what happened there in the Murrah building, a truck bomb outside the building, could have caused that building to explode 500 feet outward. You know, if it was a truck bomb going into it, the building would have exploded inward, right?
A whole part of that building in Oklahoma City came straight down, just as with the World Trade Towers, and for the same reason. There were charges placed on the columns in the buildings. That's the only way that you can get a demolition like that to happen.
But who could or would have placed the explosives? Many of our serial skeptics claim the government was involved in this one too. Why? The theory goes that they wanted to stir up a climate of fear to justify a law and order crackdown. Once again, government secrecy has fueled those suspicions.
There were other suspects who were never tracked down. The government so circumscribed its legal case against Timothy McVeigh to win the case that it never looked at these other issues, and I think those issues remain open, and who assisted in this is a big question.
So the theorists are claiming that the American government covered up the shooting down of a passenger plane and staged the Oklahoma bombings as a means of bringing in tougher law and order. It just goes to show how far government secrecy can go. But does it really have something to hide? Anyone might start thinking that the attacks on Pearl Harbor were pre-planned too. Well, the theorists do. On the 7th of December 1941, when Franklin Roosevelt was president, Japanese aircraft attacked the US Pacific Fleet in Pearl Harbor, drawing America into the war. But did the then government know in advance that this attack was going to happen? Was there a hidden agenda?
There's emerging historical evidence in the documentary record now that they had quite a bit of advance and specific warning of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and that there was a decision somewhere near the top to go ahead and let the attack come because it would give the impetus to get the United States into the war.
But they didn't make preparations at Pearl Harbor for that attack, and I believe that's because they wanted the war, because we were in a depression, and that was the only way they saw to get out of that depression.
We will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
Roosevelt deliberately did not inform the people at Pearl Harbor that they were going to be attacked, but he did send his more valuable ships out to sea to save them and left the junks at Pearl Harbor.
The people of the United States have already formed their opinions.
And Roosevelt kept everybody in the dark because he needed that atrocity to go to war in Europe to make the money that the bankers wanted to make.
So whether it's a matter of contriving atrocities or simply letting them happen, a few suspicious minds think the US government's got form. Maybe then it's no surprise that some campaigners just don't buy the official 9/11 story.
So Nick, you're down here every weekend campaigning, but what for?
Right, we've been here every week since January 2004 to stop the 9/11 cover-up.
And what is the 9/11 cover-up? What are they covering up?
Well, if you take a look at the facts of the day itself, you will see that there is a giant mass of questions that have not been dealt with in any of the official investigations. That Bush and his entourage do not react in the school, that Rumsfeld does not react in the Pentagon by their own admission. They stay wherever they were and do nothing. Now, what we also find out is that the standard operating procedures for hijackings are not actually carried out on the day.
What are they? What are the standard?
Well, normally, once a plane is diverted from its course, or if it can't be hailed for 5 minutes, the FAA is supposed to turn that over to the U.S. Air Defense System, which is supposed to scramble jets.
So there should have been jets up there.
This is theoretically supposed to happen within minutes, but there's no explanation for how it doesn't happen in the 90 minutes that it took before the Pentagon itself was hit.
But couldn't they just be, you know, to coin a lovely British phrase, just covering their asses by saying, right, well, we didn't launch any jets, you know, we obviously should have, and then the next day they're saying, well, they didn't tell us, you know, the FAA, it's their fault.
Well, there we go. If they are covering their asses, then somebody has to be held accountable.
Washington defense journalist Wayne Madsen says the authorities' failure to provide answers just adds fuel to the conspiracy fire.
The fact no one was held accountable, people will say, see, you know, nobody lost their job over it, you know, were they in on some sort of secret deal? And unfortunately, when there's no accountability, it's going to lend to that rumor mill.
But the conspiracy theorists are making some remarkable leaps to support their accounts.
One error that they make again and again is that they overestimate the competency of governmental institutions. And if planes are not deployed at the right base in the right amount of time, they have to say, aha, there's a reason for this, other than the fact that maybe it was just one god darn big screw-up.
Take the issue of whether some government agencies knew in advance about the 9/11 attacks. This can be made to sound like a cynical disregard of human life. It could just as well be a massive intelligence failure.
Some of the foreign intelligence coming into this country clearly indicated airplanes were going to be used, buildings were a target. In fact, New York City was a target. Washington, D.C. was a target. So I think one of the biggest unanswered questions is how was this intelligence treated, or was this as a result of an age-old problem with the U.S. intelligence and law enforcement community that if it's not invented here, it's not worth acting upon.
There are numerous stories about key staff being pre-warned and ordered to stay away from New York.
On the night of September 10th, and this is admitted, it's been in the San Francisco Chronicle and Associated Press, Mayor Willie Brown got a call from the White House telling him not to fly on a scheduled trip to New York that morning. But it's not just Mayor Willie Brown. The Times of London reported that Salman Rushdie was banned, quote, for his safety, from flying to New York for the month of September by the FAA.
There are questions too about the 19 Arab hijackers. The conspiracy theorists are not convinced about the evidence against them, or even that they existed at all.
We have never been given any convincing evidence that these particular 19 men or any other 19 Middle Eastern men were on board those planes. Therefore, there is no reason to conclude that that's what really happened.
So after the terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers, they found proof, didn't they, of who had perpetrated it?
Well, I really have to question some of the proof that they claim to have found. The very first piece of evidence they claim to have found was a passport of one of the hijackers on American Airlines 11, which crashed into the North Tower here. They say they found within minutes of the crash on the ground. Now, everyone should recall what the scene was like. Everyone knows these pictures, you know, of those first moments. How is it possible that this just floated straight out of the plane, survived the fire, and hit just the right spot where it was found? This sounds to me like planted evidence.
Suspicions weren't quelled when the government released the 19 names and pictures of the hijackers days after the attacks. But as the men named weren't revealed on the airline passenger lists, the conspiracy rumour mill went into internet overdrive.
Even the BBC has reported that at least 7 of the 19 hijackers have been proven to be alive. Then the FBI says, oh, we just got the names wrong.
Of the 19 alleged hijackers, 8 of those names have been found alive in other countries.
Well, maybe. But this, of course, could also show that the hijackers were adept at stealing identities. Other witnesses say they saw the men boarding the planes.
Now, some people speculated from that immediately that no Arabs were aboard the plane, but I did, again, footwork. I talked to ground crew on Flight 77 who ticket and go on the plane and count, but they don't take off with it, and they saw some of the pictures people get on the plane that day.
Lead hijacker Mohammed Atta was captured on airport CCTV cameras on the morning of 9/11. Up to then, he seemed an unlikely Muslim radical. For months before the attacks, he lived along the coast of Florida, where he and another hijacker trained at an American flight school. Local newspaper reports claimed their lifestyle was more like that of rock stars than religious fundamentalists.
Mohammed Atta was a kind of Islamic fundamentalist that was sticking $20 bills down the panties of infidel women all up and down the coast of Florida and then New York City and other places as well. So it did not make sense that he would come here to go to school.
They certainly weren't devout Muslims. If they were devout Muslims, they wouldn't have been snorting cocaine and in strip clubs the night before.
If he's not a fanatic Islamic fundamentalist, the question is, who is he?
So there are reasons to doubt whether he was an agent for Osama bin Laden. And from there, you get claims he wasn't involved in the attacks at all.
The single biggest hole, I think, is the immediate claim that somehow Osama bin Laden was responsible. Although the government and the American media immediately began saying that Osama bin Laden was responsible maybe within minutes, maybe within hours at the most of the tragedies in New York and the Pentagon. They weren't providing us any real evidence, just a lot of speculation.
I think there are thousands of people who know who is responsible for 9/11, and it's not Osama bin Laden.
So based on the evidence, or the lack of it, the hardcore of doubters think Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with 9/11, and neither did the 19 Arab hijackers. Now, it's easy to see how things can get out of control when you don't know all the facts. But if those 19 people didn't do it, then who did?
Much of the Middle East is a land of smoke and mirrors. When something seems obvious, the opposite is often true. Some see the mirror image of the Arab hijackers in the corners and corridors of Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service.
There is wide-ranging evidence of an Israeli network of spies operating here in the United States over a long period of time who were infiltrating U.S. government installations and private corporations. These young people were Israeli intelligence operatives posing as art students. There's evidence that some of these Israeli quote-unquote art students were actually living across the street from Mohammed Atta.
In a world of uncertainty, one fact is pretty certain. If Mossad did have anything to do with it, no one's going to say so. And when an organisation is as secretive as they are, you can accuse them of pretty much anything.
I tend to think that it was largely Mossad orchestrated and that there were probably a few people in key positions in the government, in sensitive positions, who were bought off or blackmailed. I mean, that's frankly what I think. Yeah, I mean, it's a very simple process.
There's no evidence that the Israelis or Mossad, their secret service, had anything to do with it. And this is one of those areas that whenever there's a major disaster, some of the conspiracy theories that immediately erupt are anti-Semitic, anti-Israel conspiracy theories. There's a long tradition of this in the United States from the far right, people who suspect that, you know, Jews run the world. This is one of those crazy and racist theories. It's very dangerous, and 9/11 was no different. These theories immediately popped up.
But at the core of the 9/11 conspiracy theories is the idea that members of the American establishment, up to the highest levels of government, had something to do with the plot, or at least knew about it in advance.
Central Intelligence Agency, Defense Intelligence, the National Security Agency. They all clearly, on the record, had total prior knowledge.
9/11 was an event that was planned without Bush's knowledge to draw him in to where he already intended to be. First of all, Iraq. Therefore, I would say other people, some inside the U.S. government and some outside the U.S. government, planned this operation in part to draw Bush into that quagmire.
The type of people that would carry out a 9/11 style attack are the type of ruthless individuals that would kill their grandmother for a stick of bubble gum. The type of people that would claw and stab their way to the top, which is really the norm in history. Ruthless individuals that have a mad, passionate desire to control and dominate others almost always get into the seats of power.
The real trouble comes when an outlandish conspiracy theory turns out to be true. US military documents from the 60s reveal a high-level plot to attack neighboring Cuba. The attacks were to be justified by a totally staged sinking of a ship, blamed on the Cubans.
This is where they explain why the government wants to carry out terror. People that can't figure this out just aren't looking at the facts. Hitler, right after being elected, firebombed his own government building, his own Reichstag, and said, we've got to have fatherland security to keep you safe. He then passed laws and then moved against the entire population. That is now happening here in America.
So, we're now being asked to believe that the darker side of the American government is behind the attacks on 9/11. But if it's true, then why? Why would Americans kill their fellow Americans? Well, oil. That's what some theorists are saying. But to find out what else might be behind it, join me after the break. The events of 9/11 were so horrific that they're barely understandable, and that's led to lots of people coming up with theories of their own to try and make sense of it all. But because the US government is so secretive, the finger of blame usually ends up pointed at them.
Take the World Trade Center Twin Towers, for example, the heart of commercial America.
There are numerous stories on the web about how the World Trade Centers were somehow in danger. They didn't meet building codes.
Well before 9/11, government agency reports showed that there were serious structural and asbestos problems within the Twin Towers. The theory goes that shadowy figures with heavy financial interests had a lot to gain if the towers were destroyed. One unsubstantiated story goes that one individual alone benefited to the tune of $500 million.
The consensus I've seen is that those buildings needed to come down before 2025 or they would have posed a hazard, and it was just a happy coincidence that the hijackers took them down without any cost to the owners whatsoever.
A multi-million-dollar insurance policy, including terrorist cover, was said to have been taken out several months before 9/11.
Its insurance policy was for at least $3.55 billion. It is trying to collect for what it calls a double occurrence because, you know, it says the towers were hit twice and so forth. The courts have denied that at first, but it at least stands to collect $3.55 billion for an investment of $15 million.
Well, it may be an insurance scam on some level, but I mean, I think going to the level of not just making the building fall down, but having a plane run into it is stretching even the imagination of most insurance companies.
If you don't like the insurance scam, here's a different theory. This one's about dirty profits being made out of share deals. The evidence comes in suspicious share movements just before 9/11.
Prior to 9/11, there was a whole rash of what's called short selling, which simply means people are betting that certain stocks are going to go down. And those stocks were in obvious key companies that would be affected by something like planes crashing into the World Trade Center.
And if someone knew that American Airlines was going to have two of its airliners hijacked by whatever means and destroyed, it would make sense for them to bet that American Airlines stock would plummet.
The trouble is, the reasons for slides in shares are always speculation. Any big change can be suspicious. It can also be quite innocent. You can't prove anything. Perhaps the most credible theory is that 9/11 was used as a pretext for war in the Middle East. A month after the atrocity, the US attacked Afghanistan, searching for Osama bin Laden and his network of followers. With war in Iraq following soon after, the claim is that the whole operation had one underlying purpose: to control and profit from the billions of gallons of Middle Eastern oil.
The purpose of 9/11, in my opinion, was to inflame public passions in America against the Arab world, to justify our going over there and stealing their oil.
$3 trillion in Afghanistan in oil, over $4 trillion found reserves in Iraq, hundreds of billions of dollars of weapons and supply contracts in record war profiteering going on under this administration.
They have said in their published writings that they want to control that whole Eurasian continent because of all the oil and other resources there.
Well, so far, the theorists have claimed that 9/11 is down to insurance scams, share deals, and a lust for oil. But there's another all-encompassing theory, that the American military, connected to the political far right, want nothing more than to put the fear of God into the American people.
Some skeptics believe that the 9/11 disaster was a perfect excuse for the far right to introduce new, strict law enforcement measures to give them more controlling power than ever. The Patriot Act was rushed through Congress straight after 9/11. It was billed as a tightening of American security. But opponents said it badly dented human rights and pushed draconian rules into American life.
The Patriot Act was probably the single largest impact inside America of 9/11. The Patriot Act was created before 9/11, and it was ready to go, and it was passed in the middle of the night with a lot of arm twisting, and it essentially destroyed all our constitutional protections.
A policeman, somebody from the FBI, it doesn't matter who in law enforcement, can come up to you. No crime has been committed, no reason is given. They just say, "Who are you?" And you have to tell them.
They can come into your home while you're gone. They can look at your reading records. Everything they want now is available to them.
The idea is to create a big eye that watches everybody and decides, is that okay, or shall we arrest that person?
The idea of a malignant Big Brother government controlling everything is nothing new. For years there have been claims about secret experiments using mind control techniques to brainwash the population.
From at least the 1930s, there has been an ongoing paid government program to influence the thoughts.
can we actually control a person's mind so that we can make him into an unwitting agent? He'll do what we want him to do.
Admittedly, this sounds like science fiction, but it is technically possible.
Some believe even now that these mind control weapons are hidden in mobile phone towers, and that they use the microwave signals to control your brain. Private investigator Roger Tulsa says he's been helping clients who suffer from these electronic harassment problems.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing.
By using his own tracking device, he believes he can combat these signals.
This is basically a spectrum analyzer, and what it does is a complex radio receiver. And it gives us the ability to look at all the electronic wave transmissions in the whole spectrum. And what I'm particularly focusing on here is this 800 megahertz range. And this is the kind of wave that's characteristic of these mind control waves that we're trying to track down to see if that's what's interfering with our clients and causing their electronic harassment problems, voices in the head, buzzing. All these things can come off these kind of towers in a microwave transmitted format.
Over the last 10 years, Roger's been digging out locations, searching for these secret mind control signals. And he's got no shortage of clients.
I hear from roughly 3 new individuals a day. My estimate would be you probably have about 300,000 people here that are victims at this time. That'd be just an estimate. Okay, there's one right there.
It didn't take too long for Roger to detect some incoming secret mind control waves.
Well, that is the cell antenna that we were looking for. As we were making the readings in the truck, and we were driving looking at the spectrum analyzer, and the signals were getting larger, they became extremely large as we approached this cell site here. And this is just one of the many, many cell sites that cover the whole city. And if at any point they start broadcasting these kind of wave transmissions that are the mind control transmissions, it will affect the whole population at large.
Well, it is California. Clearly, some conspiracy theories sound more like the plot of the slightly dodgy Jeffrey Archer novel. But there are those that would seem to have more credibility, and in particular, the ones that the government have so far failed to answer. But is it really possible that any of them could be true?
Government secrecy breeds conspiracy theories.
They're forced to rely on a sparsity of information and to speculate from that sparsity of information.
It creates a breeding ground for people to come up with alternative explanations and to disbelieve government across the board.
It almost works like a sport where people try to come up with the craziest or the most inventive or the most clever explanation for something.
Let's take you back to the Pentagon, where American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the country's most heavily defended building. Conspiracy theorists claim it was a missile that struck the building and not a plane.
A local news reporter was sent to the Pentagon after the second tower was hit, feeling that there would be some sort of a statement from the Pentagon, and on the way encountered a woman pulled to the side of the road, standing as if in shock, unable to speak, got out of the car to help her, was pointed to the far side of her car, and saw that a part of the car was sheared off and a piece of the landing gear was sitting next to it.
There were Arlington, Virginia policemen that followed that plane down one of the busiest streets in the county when it was vectoring for its impact on the Pentagon. They followed that plane down Columbia Pike, which is a beeline for the Pentagon. They saw it hit the building because they were wondering what's wrong with this aircraft.
So that seems to confirm that the plane actually hit the building. But what about the mysteriously small hole?
There's also the question of the hole, is it large enough? Well, this is a reinforced building with multiple layers, multiple walls. The plane rammed into it directly. Most airline crashes don't leave a lot of debris. Most of the debris is pulverized.
Then there's the collapse of the Twin Towers. Theorists claim the impact of the planes alone was not sufficient to bring the buildings down.
You don't need that extra bomb to bring the building down. As engineers have pointed out in the aftermath of the disaster, the crash of the planes and the ensuing fire would have been enough to bring the buildings down.
I also read things that said that the building was structured with central core girders in order to collapse that way and not fall over if it did come to damage.
Finally, the mystery about Flight 93 that crashed in Pennsylvania. Many theorists claim it was actually shot down by members of the US Air Force.
There's no definitive evidence or no explicitly persuasive evidence that the flight over Pennsylvania was shot down, but there are a few interesting, eyewitness reports of other aircraft seen in the area, smoke and debris falling from the plane that might suggest that something else happened there. It's an open question right now. I think these questions need to be answered by the official committees looking into the 9/11 disasters. So far they haven't, and I think that's a problem.
No number of official committees will ever satisfy the serial skeptics, determined to doubt whatever officialdom tells them. The best conspiracy theories are just that, theories. They can't be proved or disproved. What they have in common is that they come with a confetti of claims and accusations, and none more so than the theories surrounding 9/11.
It's clear that there are loose threads when it comes to 9/11, and the skeptics obviously want answers. But as with any conspiracy theory, it seems the more questions you ask, the more unanswerable questions you raise. So it's easy to see how things can quickly get out of control. But then, maybe that's just my mind chip talking. Good night.